Thanks for tuning in to the Marvel Movie Minute.
Want to skip those pesky ads and get early access?
Become a member at truestory.fm/join and discover all the other great perks that come with it.
Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a weekly podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 5 units at a time. In this, our 8th season, we're looking at Thor: The Dark World. I'm Matthew Fox.
And I'm Pete Wright.
And today we're talking about minutes 21 through 25, which begins with a bunch of kids proving Newton wrong and ends as Jane tries, unsuccessfully, to do the backstroke in the ether.
Okay. I get your jibes right now, Matthew.
Yes.
But this is not a bad set of minutes right here. I have I have problems with the minutes, but they're more existential problems, which we'll talk about. Do you take issue, given your noted antagonism to the film, with these minutes?
No. It was easier for me to disassociate because almost nothing happened. If I paid attention to what was happening, I was again reminded that the people making this movie seem to hate cinema and all the good rules of it. But no, it was not much happened. And I feel like we're framing this as I hate this movie with a fiery passion. And that's not actually true. It's
that
just,
is certainly the game we're playing here.
I
right?
can make you laugh by doing it. There was nothing in these minutes that was kind of offensive or problematic or like, oh, that was horrible acting. I'm surprised. Let me reframe it. I'm curious. I want to experience the world with curiosity, not judgment. So Ted Lasso style, what did you enjoy about these minutes?
I think these minutes offer us a bit of a vibe shift. And I think the vibe is important. I think when, we'll talk about what actually happens, which isn't much. But for me, the celebration is the mood of the minutes that we get to see here and some of the lessons in filmmaking that these last, particularly the 3.5 minutes, offer us in what they're trying to do. Kramer Morgenthau and Dan Leventhal and Alan Taylor. I think this is a good show of mood that is interesting to me. Well,
Ted Lasso's wrong because so are you. But no, really what I find funny is that I'm going to stay in the Ted Lasso and ask you to say more and I think this might be the sort of thing where I think this is now not the movie's failing, but my own. It's funny because my camera's been cutting out a lot. For those of you who have been watching me on recent podcasts on YouTube, I'm not on camera very much. There's something weird with the wires to my camera. I've got to fix it. But like if I jostle the table in any way, it cuts out and I can't bring it back in. But it also meant I didn't have to keep a straight face as you were saying that for so long.
I feel like this was a booby trap just to get me making faces. Great.
And this is why I say it's my failure. I went to Paris and I went to the Louvre with my family and I got to the Mona Lisa and I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. It's just a painting of a woman with a weird smile. Like, and people talk about like, oh, but all of these things, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I don't see it at all. And so I'm going to stay in that Ted Lasso place of curiosity. Tell me more about what was happening for you in those couple of minutes, because I didn't see anything that was noteworthy. And I'm sure that is because there's noteworthy things happening that I missed. So when we'll get to some of the dialogue parts, but like, so in those couple of minutes that you said were so artistic or interesting, what are the choices being made that stood out to you?
Okay. Let's start with the cinematography. I find the lighting choices in this minute, particularly with Jane's exploration, looking for the portal, falling into this combination practical CG universe where the Aether is interesting looking. The lighting is stark. It is super directional. It's underlit often with lots of really cold tones and deep shadows. And I mean, it's dark. If you're watching this on a computer screen in a window that is otherwise bright, you can't see anything, right? You really have to pay attention and watch this on a good setup because they have chosen to go supremely dark in this set of minutes. Once Jane is in the Aether realm, it becomes even more desaturated. Like you can just watch the Aether seems to suck the color out, because it's accentuating the contrast-heavy red, and it evokes just great isolation and unease. The camera is moving. There's a great tracking shot as we watch Jane walk through the warehouse as it's slowly paralleling her path. It is deliberately slow. It's sort of floating. She's expressionless. I think it's capturing this mood of exploration and enhancing dread. And that's what we want, right? We want these dolly shots to pull us into the portal with her. And I think it does that really well. It mirrors her exploration of the unknown. I think the compositions, she is isolated visually, sometimes on a large frame, sometimes on a smaller frame. She is alone. She is swallowed by negative space. And once she's in the ether realm, the scale totally shifts. She's dwarfed by these monolithic rock structures all over the place and floating debris and craziness. And, it makes this feel like kind of a first draft of some of the stuff we see later in Doctor Strange, which is, I think, really compelling visually. So I am at this point just looking at the camera in color. I'm kind of in it. Like I'm an enthusiastic supporter of the look of these minutes. Where I suffer, and we'll talk about this, as we go on, is that it feels like they did some really great stuff here and then forgot that they did later. We'll talk about that. I think the editing, you'll notice a really compelling rhythmic tension in the way this thing is cut. It slows down considerably compared to prior scenes, especially with the kids, which tend to be more frenetic pacing, fewer quick cuts, more sustained shots, drawing out suspense. We've got some good crossfades and subtle jump cuts. And like I wrote down, like I can't even read my own handwriting. We've got just a lot of these editing tools to unsettle us. Time doesn't feel linear when it's being cut sort of radically. And when Jane falls into the other realm, that's what we get. And finally, Taylor, I guess he's once again, he's sort of leaning into his Game of Thrones roots.
Who is Taylor that we're talking about? Just to make sure.
He's director, Alan Taylor.
Okay.
And I think he treats this sequence like a horror fantasy instead of a high octane kind of horror jaunt, right? He lets Natalie Portman play vulnerability and curiosity and awe all at the same time. And she doesn't scream or panic. She's just curious and stunned and eventually overtaken. So I think that's where I would start my case for my enthusiasm for this.
And I think I want to be very clear. I don't want to doubt or dissuade that in the slightest. I think if that is your experience of the movie, that is phenomenal. And to be clear, I'm not blind, obviously, and I very rarely have I watched movies with the describe what's happening visually kind of filter on, or it's not a subtitle track, but it's another kind of track. But I have done it a couple of times. And frankly, if I could watch the movie through your eyes, or just watch it with you describing like that, I probably would have loved it. But even as you were talking, and again, this is probably just my failing, but if listeners feel the same, let me know. I turned on those minutes because I had them queued up, and I just didn't get any of that. I know Natalie Portman can be an amazing actress. Part of I think why I was bored is she looked bored. The underlit and stuff like that. And yeah, I make a point to watch them and kind of wasn't this time again, but for a dark room. I feel like all the MCU is lit like that. But no, I think that is really helpful to me about seeing more of what you are seeing in this, because I'm definitely not seeing it. And I think that probably has a huge effect on why it is hitting you a lot harder.
Well, and this is the thing that I think is much more interesting to me, this watch of the movie in general. The things that are surprising me about what Taylor is bringing to the film is, one, he's allowing genre moments to breathe. And I think it's important. And I would just say, and we'll file this under the what can Matthew learn about filmmaking segment that we launched so long ago. I would just say I've jotted down 4 points. Watch for whenever the director lets genre moments breathe, like this one. We get 3 minutes of exploration and falling into the Aether where things slow down. He gives horror room to settle. It's not rushed. There are no gags. Even as MCU, often leans into these quippy kind of fast, jarring, bits, right? It's
Right.
very bit heavy, the MCU. There's no bit here, right? The bit has already happened. The joke happened early on with the keys. Now we're just in exploring mode and it slows down. So that's number one. Number two, silence and stillness can be very stressful. And watching her walk, watching what happens to her as she's floating, that sort of slower pacing and restrained score, Brian Tyler's score, it's all very minimalist and can be very unsettling. And I think those are other things I'm watching for. When does the movie succeed there? And the number three, camera as the emotional proxy, right? For us, making the choices they did with the camera and the lens to mirror Jane's emotional state, it is actually incredibly powerful. It's like first curious and steady as she's walking through the warehouse, and then wildly erratic and confused as she's, putting her hand between the rocks and getting absorbed. And I think that those are some of the things that I think make this work. And what I'm looking for in the movie is, when does it exceed the expectation of MCU? And this is a set of minutes where tonally it does for me. I can get behind what they're doing here.
I think that's really fair, and that's also really helpful, and maybe can also help me frame why maybe I don't see that in the same way, alongside my just not having the visual acumen that you're talking about. I think for me, those minutes where she is kind of like going off to search for the portal itself, and she's going through the rock, and she reaches through to like try to find the thing. First of all, failing dramatically on her, the common sense roll, but nonetheless, this is who she is. I definitely think those are, I got some of the feelings you're getting. To me, though, and I actually wrote down, are we trying to be a horror movie here? Why is it looking spooky?
Right.
Right. Because to me, it didn't feel like, oh, this is an interesting genre moment. It felt like very discordant, but not in a way where it felt like, sometimes discordance in music or as a metaphor can be great. Here it just felt like, what are we doing? And I think a big part of it was because the ether it just looked ridiculous to me. I think in part because I still have no context for what it is. Like, is it sentient? Is it reaching out to her? Does it want it to be awoken? Does it want to be connected to the dark elves? And I think a lot of it was interspersing this awakening of the dark elves scene in the middle of it. Because, and I will say, they do a good job of letting us know that, like, the minute the ether connects to Jane, that is the thing that wakes up the dark elves.
Right.
I will say that never mind. I guess because it's not been here in London for very long. I don't really understand where it's been until then, but if it hasn't been in London really long, or this is connected to the convergence, so it hasn't happened before then, fine. But like the dark elf scene, especially if we're thinking about horror, to me, that scene was like, it made Twilight look like good vampire movie making. He kind of emerges from this kind of a coffin thing, but it's over him, but he's so pale that it definitely looks like that kind of awakening scene. And he just looks dumb. He looks like he's got these big elfin ears. He's incredibly pale. He says something in a language we don't know. And I don't think there's even a translation of it this time. I just laughed at it at that point. And so I think for me also, that trying to do that, which felt like it was horror, but it felt like it was like schlocky horror, and then going back to real horror, I think it's part of why I got lost, because it did not all fit together for me. What did you think of the reveal of Malekith?
I will endorse that position,
okay,
Matthew. Because I thought the same thing. One, why I think they get the production design, the design of these characters and the ship and everything, and leaning in on the waking up the way they do. I think they got their wires crossed,
right?
Because Malekith is not a monster. Right. Malekith is not a universal monster. Right. We're not waking up a vampire. These are the dark elves, and the tone they chose on this ship was much closer to that of monster horror. And I think that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a mistake on a number of levels. But the first and foremost, like how I don't know that I have a great answer for how you wake up a generationally sleeping, race. I don't know how you do that. But this one, they messed up because he already looks like a vampire a little bit. And so to put that in our heads, I think was a mistake. And too on the nose for the kind of horror that we really want, which is the intensity, the environmental horror, the mood horror, the tension that we get, as the Aether is awoken. So I struggle with that too. I'm not gonna fight you on this one.
Well, so let me just ask then, in your understanding, is the Aether sentient?
Okay, you're unlocking a thing now, and I think we should prepare for a bit of a rant.
Okay. I'm strapped in.
What the hell is this anyway? I think the problem that I have with this, so in Thor the Dark World, what Aether is this formless, fluid-like substance, right? What does it do? It's capable of infecting and bonding with host creatures. It is obviously destructive and reality altering. It is a target sought by Malekith and his vampire cohorts to plunge the universe back into darkness. But it is retroactively revealed that the Aether is the reality stone. This just feels so wildly disconnected and sloppy on the part of the MCU for not having their Infinity Stone brand guide in order yet. Like, why do they make a whole movie about this stuff that they just don't understand yet? I feel like that's a huge problem with the sort of, and I'm approaching this from a real Doyleist perspective, that the creator should have known better before they made this movie just how important the reality stone was going to be. And they didn't. They didn't know.
I didn't get an exact stopwatch, but for those coming home, I believe it took about 4.5 minutes for Pete to go from, actually, I found something in this movie I like, to back to ranting about it. So I'm going to take some victory calls there. But joke aside, no, I did not incite that. That was all from you.
Nope. And this movie, as much as I'm celebrating all the vibes that I like so much,
there's good things to celebrate.
This part just pisses me off, Matthew. There's just no other way to put it.
Part of it, I think, is also, and again, I don't know the lore from the comics, and so if you or other listeners at some point can help fill that in, great.
It was a stone.
But sure, when you think of what are the stones that are going to have some kind of like maybe sentience or some kind of esoteric property that is divergent from our reality, but that exists in states that we don't fully understand, you think of the Mind Stone, you think of the Soul Stone, you think of the Time Stone. The one that I think is going to the most line up with like changing all the laws of reality, but still be within the laws of reality, is the one called the Reality Stone.
Yes.
And so it just felt like, I feel like one of the things that all these big movie franchises have to deal with, and we talked about this with Star Wars, we talked about this, we talked about it with DC, is how do you have these independent properties that should be standalone features that hopefully, audiences don't have to do a huge amount of homework to consume on their own, but that also fit into this larger narrative. And if I remember my timing, this was beginning the period that I think really kind of ends with Ultron, but comes back at various points where there was a real tension between, are you creating an independent work or are you doing something to set up to be a building block for the final capstone of this phase of the MCU? And I agree with you. I feel like they wanted to introduce the Reality Stones, but maybe they hadn't the Infinity Stones, but they hadn't finished that, guide yet. So they couldn't tell the writer and the director, okay, this is what they're going to be. But they also had told them maybe the things they could, I don't know. Because it doesn't, not only is it not inherently, it was inherently inconsistent in the movie, but at least helped us to understand what they would be for the larger phase 2, phase 3 arc. I'm there. I'm okay with that. But nothing about it comes back up again. The Reality Stone having this ability to kind of like suck people in or something is never mentioned throughout the Infinity Saga after this.
Right. Yeah, it is, I think, part and partial to all of that is that the reality stone, as we have it in the Dark World, is introduced in a really weird context that is set apart from the other stones, right? The other stones are typically framed inside much larger cosmic forces, right? Whether it's the Celestials or the Ancient Wars or whatever. The Aether is framed through Malekith and the Dark Elves, which we've already established are largely disconnected from the broader MCU cosmology, right? We just don't get them anymore. So that almost allows a little bit of forgiveness to your exact point. Like if you just skip this movie altogether and you move on and you suddenly see the reality stone is a stone and it's in the gauntlet already, and maybe we don't need to think too hard about it. They can just exposition us to death and tell us what it does. It's totally possible to do that and leave this movie completely alone. And I think part of it is because of the treatment that they gave the reality stone in this movie as Aether, and they did not completely cement how it was going to play a part in this larger saga by relegating it to second and third tier characters that they're never going to look at again.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think, again, and like the idea that we're asking for more exposition is kind of weird, but it's because I don't really trust them to tell us things any other way.
Yeah, right. I have to stand by that point, right?
You know, is it that there's something inherently about the Aether stone, the Aether stone, that is the Dark Elves are primordially connected to this stone? Is it because the Aether stone was something they were working with that it's not like they have a claim over it, but it has a claim over them? Because that's part of the, whatever Odin did to banish them. Like it just.
I think it's also interesting in just that it behaves so completely differently and in a way that's actually really compelling. Like if it wasn't the reality stone, it would be kind of cool because what do we have? We have the Aether that literally possesses Jane. Like there's a story in here where the Aether is some sort of cosmological symbiote that could be kind of cool, but because it gets retconned into the reality stone, it sort of breaks canon in a way that isn't satisfying.
Well, and I think part of it is for me is that, and yeah, granted, we're going to get some of the symbiote nature later in the movie, but right now, I know I said this is a joke, but it just looked to me like a black and red swimming pool. Like,
yeah, that's funny.
And again, I watched it with all the lights off again, and I closed the shades to look for it, and I see kind of like the shapes floating around her, but it just looks like she's just in liquid, and I don't know what I'm supposed to find interesting about that, or I'm supposed to. And I think, again, this may also just be my kind of realism coming in that, like, there's another Marvel movie that we'll be discussing at some point, you and I in some podcast or another, I'm not sure which, but where a large part of it takes place as characters enter the mind of another, and they're sort of dealing with entities in dreams or in metaphors. And I always find those kind of scenes a little frustrating because I'm like, how realistic are we supposed to treat this when it's all supposed to be just manifestations of dreams or nightmares or depression or whatever it is? And I kind of feel like this. I don't know at this point, has Jane been transported to a different dimension in which this pool of liquid that the Aether exists? Does this pool exist literally right there? And if Darcy just like went around a corner, she would see it? Is Jane experiencing the feeling of being swept up in this liquid and maybe drowning? And what we're seeing is the visual representation of the metaphor that she's creating to experience it? I have no idea. And because I'm not given anything to latch on to like that, I think it's why it's hard for me to be like, oh, cool, look at this lighting, look at this detail, when I'm just like, stop with the funny lighting. Tell me what the hell's going on. And I get that the immediate artistic response should be the funny lighting is telling you what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, cool, you're speaking a language I don't speak, and that's my fault. And I'm really glad you all speak it. But this is, again, why I'm maybe not the best.
It doesn't answer your question.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't help. Yeah, I think that's it. The bottom line, right, is that the Aether, and I'm sure we'll come back to this, but I want to make this the sort of foundational episode as the Aether is introduced, that the Aether was introduced before Marvel had, fully solidified I guess, pun intended, the
Right.
look and behavior of the Infinity Stones. And it was designed to fit the tone and themes of the Dark World and not the Infinity Saga. And that's a thing I absolutely struggle to separate as a fan and a viewer, and its powers are consistent with the concept of the Reality Stone, as you fully illuminated, but the form and execution are so radically different that it makes it puts us in a position of having to quietly and not so quietly retcon its presentation later, in films. And that is a frustrating place where we are with this central MacGuffin, the central conceit of the transfer of power between good and ill in this movie, and not crazy about it.
Right. Well, especially because to me, reality is one of those things that has no good or evil. Like lightning storms do incredible damage. They also do incredible help to, help forestry grow, and, terrible rainstorms, people die and crops grow. Like reality to me should be about what is the amoral, not good or evil. It should be about like, these are just the forces of reality, and earthquakes are what makes the world possible, but kill horrible numbers of people, and yeah. So just, in part, it's like, why the Reality Stone in specific? There's so many other things they could have done.
Well, I think you're making the point, actually, why the Reality Stone, because the Reality Stone itself is amoral, but once it is bonded with someone who actually can control it, we discover that reality in the hands of a maladaptive force is maladaptive.
Right.
And that's the whole Thanos story.
And I think, again, though, that's where the story breaks down here, because isn't it now in the power of Jane? So shouldn't it become like a much brighter red? Shouldn't it become like a, like a pretty pink pool or something like that? Okay, now let me go back to the slight vampire Malekith rant that I want to give.
Sure.
And I'll say this as someone who loves vampires. And I've seen a lot of vampires do a lot of different things. I have seen vampires travel by turning themselves into bats and turning themselves into mist. I have seen vampires travel in horse-drawn carriages and on palanquins hoisted by slaves. I have seen vampires travel in fancy cars driven by Tom Cruise or others, or whatever, all the wonderful vehicles that they drove in Vampire Diaries. The vampire aesthetic doesn't really work in a spaceship. And what they show is not just Malekith waking up, but his spaceship waking up. And I know that Thor is all about blending sci-fi and fantasy, but frankly, I think we talked about this in the first one, I think it works a lot better when it is primarily in the realm of fantasy, where there's just enough science fiction that we understand that, like, to others, that it is science to them, but all the rest of us, it seems fantasy. And I do think the one good moment for me in these minutes, the scene between Heimdall and Thor, very much has that fantasy feel, that idea of, how do we know that Heimdall is seeing all these things? If he looked down at a computer screen that was just going by very fast, and that's how he watches the 10 trillion souls, it would be horrible. But instead, we see that brilliant shot of his eye.
Yes.
And we see the change in what he's seeing in his eye. To me, putting Malekith in a spaceship is Heimdall with a computer screen. It pulls me so far out and into that world of science fiction that it just getting me back into horror, getting me back into fantasy is really hard. Excuse me.
Normally I would agree with you on that point, but we also live in a world where the movie Life Force exists, with directed by Tobe Hooper, which is exactly vampires in space, and I sort of live for that movie. It doesn't. There are a lot of ways it doesn't work, but there are more where it does. And
perhaps my ignorance is a blessing, but I have never heard of this movie.
I'll give you that. The question is, does it work here? And I think your point stands that Malekith is just sort of a sad villain for us right now, and it's not great for this movie. No,
I think it's really true. And let's just go back to that Heimdall Thor moment, because this for me was, I think, my favorite moment in these 5 minutes. And I think one of my favorite moments, certainly what has, to this point, my favorite line in the whole movie. And it's where Thor comes in and Heimdall says you're late. And I don't know what he's late for or what the appointment is. Thor says, merriment can sometimes be a heavier burden than battle, which is a beautiful, wonderful line. And someone who has not done physical battle, but I've played rugby and I've gone to the rugby parties afterward, and I can understand the sentiment that he is alluding to. And Heimdall responds, then you're doing one of them incorrectly. Yes. And I just love that so much, because I don't know if what he means is drink responsibly and don't get hungover, you stupid kid, or if he means you're not pushing yourself hard enough in battle and battle should hurt more, you coward. And it's either one is open for interpretation, and both meanings are great, and he probably means both, and I just love it. In this, like, the first movie is all about Thor being put in his place, and he's a lot better now. But I like that someone like Heimdall, even when his dad is like, Thor, you're the best now, even Heimdall's like, you're still a stupid kid to me, and that's okay.
Well, a stupid kid, but also a kid who is stuck in the conflict that exists between responsibility and, I'll say humanity, Asgardinity.
Right.
That in fact the other option is, hey, if you're feeling pressure during merriment, then that's the problem. Merriment should be fun and joyful, and you should do more of it. Right. And let yourself go because you work so hard in battle. And to me, that relationship is one of, like, you'll never hear this advice from Odin, but Heimdall is like the uncle that is going to speak truth to you, when dad's not around. Right. And that on that front, I think that relationship is really great. And that relationship gets, betrayed on behalf of how it is written many times in the future. But right now it's pretty special. And you're right. The fact that it's punctuated by that eye shot is extraordinary.
And in some ways, I feel like this is a much more powerful statement about what the Aether is doing than anything else we get, because then it goes to, he asks about Jane, and Heimdall in his very high fantasy, language, describes her as your mortal. And he says that she is very smart, that though she does not know it, she has discovered the convergence. And I love the admiration. And again, it's very much a kind of like, oh, look at the little chickens. They've figured out how to go through the maze we've built them. I don't know why I said chicken instead of mice, because no one builds mazes for chickens. At least I hope not. But we're going to...
Chicken mazes are very popular in certain parts of the world.
Well, that's one more reason I go to Oregon.
Don't know that.
But too much weed in that state. But anyway, he's kind of very patronizing, but also very like honoring him through it, but mostly honoring her. And then the way he just stops in the middle of the sentence of, I can't see her anymore.
Yeah.
And what that I think honestly that moment told me more about the Aether than anything else. Because what it told me is that the Aether exists outside of the reality that Heimdall can see. It is something different. It is a different dimension. And that it has taken Jane into that. And to me, that's everything we need in that moment. So yeah, I thought that was perfect.
Have we covered everything that we wanted to talk about this 5 minutes? We've ranted, we've complained, we celebrated some things.
We found a couple things to talk about. We haven't tried to sell anything yet. We should probably do that at some point before we. Do you
want to try and sell something?
Sign off.
We could do that. I'm ready.
Well, because Pete, here's the thing. I am enjoying this, but what if I wanted to get more? What if I'm Kylo Ren? What if I wanted to get more Marvel content, more of you and Andy content, more like if I didn't want it just for the movies, but I wanted to know about the Easter eggs. I wanted to know more about the bonus little movies that are put out. Where do I get more?
Oh, Matthew, I'm so glad you asked. Cue the hero music. Do you want to be a hero? Not the kind that gets bitten by a radioactive podcast, but the kind that helps this show keep running? Then it's time to suit up and become a Marvel Movie Minute hero. Join as a supporting member, and your dollars, pesos, yen, euros, and even good old krona go directly to the production of our content, helping us dive deeper, get nerdier, and stay on schedule like S.H.I.E.L.D. with a spreadsheet. Here's what you get when you join the team early access to episodes so you're always one step ahead of Thanos. Bonus and extended episodes. You know, the director's cut of our nonsense. Access to exclusive Discord channels where the real endgame conversations happen. And if you go annual, you'll get that plus our current season stickers. That's right, merch that sticks. It's just $5 a month or $55 a year, and no, we don't snap away half that value. Just head over to MarvelMovieMinute.com and help us keep this multiverse of movie madness alive. Because with great podcasting comes great listener support.
I actually going to say one last thing in terms of heroes and stuff like that, which is that I just finished watching I just finished watching Andor, the last episode of that. Not going to say anything spoilery here, but come on over to my podcast, both Star Wars Generations is the main place, but we have some ethical issues to discuss from it on superhero ethics. But most importantly, I was a little bit dreading watching these movies because the only way Stellan Skarsgård doesn't get an Emmy for his work in this show is if one of the other amazing actors playing an amazing part in Andor gets it instead. With the recognition that The Pit is also amazing and will probably actually steal everything from this and The Last of Us. But putting that aside, Stellan Skarsgård reminded me what an incredible actor he was. And I am so grateful he wasn't in these 5 minutes, because it would have been so painful to watch him badly directed, saying bad dialogue. Like, I think he's doing his best. I think Natalie Portman's doing her best. I think everyone's doing their best in these movies, but it's not Shakespeare. It is not, right. So I'm just, that's my joy for today. We're going to go into our bonus member section for members only. Apparently we have to speak like pirates to members. I don't know why, but that's the thing that's been set up.
That's British hero voice.
Sure. But yes, the point being, I'm very glad Stellan Skarsgård was not in this. He's doing his best, but just, it's like watching someone in the Super Bowl and then watching a tape of them in middle school peewee football, and like, the potential is there, but wow, it's a different style. It's a different level of quality.
It's an exercise in range, Matthew. It just shows range. And Stellan Skarsgård's range is near infinite.
Good to bad is not acting range. That's improvement. That's better tools to use. Anyway, all right, let's wrap up.
Yep, let's wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us today. We appreciate your time and your attention. Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM. Engineering's by yours truly. You can find the show at marvelmovieminute.com. And, as always, if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show. Now, if you're a member, don't press stop if you're in your feed, because we're going to keep talking. But if you're not a member, you should become one so you can hear what we think about this week's rankings.
There we go.
Thanks all.
Live long and prosper.